Então, vamos começar o nosso próximo painel, Empoderando Professores, protagonistas para a educação bilíngue. Nesse painel, a gente vai conversar um pouquinho sobre formação de professores, incluindo formação inicial, continuados, desafios, boas práticas. E para comandar essa conversa, eu convido a Selma Moura a se juntar a nós. A Selma é pesquisadora e especialista em educação bilíngue. Eu imagino que muitos de vocês já a conheçam. Mas uma pequena introdução, a Selma ela é mestre em Linguagem e Educação pela Faculdade de Educação da USP, pedagoga e especialista em Linguagens das Artes pela USP. Ela tem experiência na área de educação como professora, coordenadora e diretora, com ênfase em educação bilíngue, ensino e aprendizagem de línguas, desenvolvimento de currículo e formação de professores. Hoje ela faz parte do corpo docente do Instituto Singularidades, Instituto Superior de Educação de Voti, da PUC-Paraná e da Unicef. Bem-vinda, Selma. Muito obrigada pela disponibilidade em estar conosco. É um prazer tê-la conosco sempre.
Muito obrigada, Bárbara. Eu agradeço a você e a toda a sua equipe do time de educação da UK em Brasil. É sempre um prazer participar dos eventos, aprendendo. Eu estava aprendendo muito agora há pouco com o painel anterior. E agradeço, é uma honra estar aqui com os nossos panelistas, apresentantes de hoje. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigada a você. Vou só apresentar o Jason e a Silvana e eu passo aí para você comandar essa discussão. Então, teremos conosco hoje o Jason Skeet e a Silvana Richardson, que vão falar um pouquinho da experiência deles, conversar um pouco sobre o que eles já vivenciaram. O Jason ele é instrutor sênior e gerente de projetos da Nile, responsável por liderar e coordenar todos os aspectos acadêmicos do programa. Ele é também examinador principal para o certificado e diploma internacional de ensino de alunos bilíngues de Cambridge e atua como consultor freelancer e instrutor em Content and Language Integrated Learning, o nosso querido Clio, que já falamos bastante dele, e a MAI. Ele tem mais de 20 anos de experiência trabalhando no nível básico, superior, com alunos, professores e palestrantes de várias partes do mundo. E também já trabalhou como consultor e instrutor em Clio na Universidade de Utrecht, fornecendo aconselhamento e treinamento para as escolas bilíngues em toda a Holanda. Antes disso, ele também lecionou por 7 anos em uma escola secundária bilíngue holandesa. Então, uma pessoa que pode trazer uma visão bastante legal para a gente. E a Silvana, ela é chefe de capacitação de professores da Bell English e tem 25 anos de experiência com ensino de inglês, além de possuir mestrado em educação de professores, qualificação PGCE e Delta, tendo treinado diversos professores ao redor do mundo. Na Bell English, ela atua como diretora acadêmica de estudos e anteriormente foi diretora de curso da Bell Online Delta. Também escreve materiais de treinamento de formação de professores para Bell Delta e Cambridge English Teacher, e atua como conferencista internacional, hoje conosco aqui no Brasil. Deixo com você agora, Selma, um bom painel para todos nós. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigada. Esse tema é um tema muito importante para nós, sempre foi, e agora se torna cada vez mais importante, porque o conhecimento, né, a gente já está superando essa ideia de que a gente vive numa economia de conhecimento, de troca, de colaboração, e a docência é um ponto-chave. Eu sempre digo que a escola é tão boa quanto são seus professores, porque a experiência do aluno depende muito da interação com o professor. Então, para mim é uma honra participar desse painel e conhecer um pouco mais da visão desses dois apresentadores que vêm aqui conosco hoje, falando sobre a sua experiência, sobre o seu conhecimento, suas perspectivas. Então, muito obrigada, bem-vindos e deixo a palavra para vocês. O meu trabalho vai ser tentar mediar a interação entre o público aqui nas questões de Q&A e a apresentação de vocês. Fiquem à vontade, a palavra é de vocês. Jason, yeah, thank you.
Not to unmute myself there, sorry. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Silvana. It's great to have both of you here and learn from you and exchange ideas. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Would you like to start, one of you first? Have you arranged an order?
Jason, would you like to start? I'm happy either way.
Okay, Silvana, yeah, I can go first. So hello everyone, my name's Jason Skeet. I work for an organisation called Nile, which is a UK-based teacher training organisation. And I should say thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm going to just share my screen because I've got some slides to help with my presentation. So, oops. Can you see those slides? I hope you can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Okay. So I've been asked to talk about what the competencies are that teachers need to develop to teach in bilingual schools. And this is also a chance for me to talk about the sort of things that I think need to be focused on in terms of teachers' professional development. So it's a very short presentation, of course. Here's just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I want to look at the main challenges as I see it for teachers teaching in a bilingual education context. And in a Brazil context, of course, this means using English as the target language. I've got 5 competency areas that I'm going to highlight. There could be more. I'm just highlighting and sketching 5 competency areas. And then I'll make some reference to what I consider to be some useful frameworks for CLIL teaching standards. I am going to be talking about CLIL as well. So, what are the challenges that teachers face when they're teaching their subject through English, when they're teaching content through English? Of course, first of all, a challenge is going to be the language level, and that means the teacher's own language level as well as their learner's language level. That means there's going to be a challenge in terms of classroom communication, the communication between the teacher and the learners as well as between the learners. There's also going to be a challenge for teachers in terms of teaching difficult subject concepts through that second language. That's a challenge. There's also a challenge, and here I'm thinking in terms of content knowledge, a challenge where the context is, for example, a primary school teaching context where a language teacher, for example, is being asked to teach subject content. And for that teacher, there's a challenge in terms of their confidence and their confidence in terms of delivering that content. And finally, there's a challenge which arguably is a challenge for teachers everywhere, but planning and preparation. But I think in terms of a bilingual education context, we need to really keep this in mind, because for many teachers, being asked to teach in a bilingual education context, it's like starting all over again as a teacher, even when you're an experienced teacher. So this means for those who are managing schools and programs, it's really important to keep this in mind, the planning and preparation that's involved. Okay, so I want to talk about competencies, but before I show you the 5 competencies that I want to highlight, it's worth just pointing out that when we talk about competencies, we are looking potentially at 3 perspectives here. There's a knowledge perspective, and here, in terms of teacher knowledge, of course, that's going to be the subject knowledge, the subject that's being taught, but also there's pedagogical knowledge. This is where we're thinking about underpinning theory and principles of teaching and learning. There's also a practice perspective. In other words, what we expect to see in the classroom, if you like, the how of the teaching. And then a third perspective on competencies is the idea of qualities and attributes. So what sort of professional behaviour and conduct would we want to see from teachers? Now, what I want to highlight in a moment are 5 competency areas that focus on teaching practice. And I think teacher training is most impactful when it does focus on the practice. However, we would still expect to see in a professional development context that these other aspects or perspectives of competencies, the knowledge perspective and the qualities and attributes perspectives, they would still be touched on. And in what I'm going to say, I might touch on them as well. But I do want to focus on teaching practice. And there are 5 competency areas that I want to focus on that I've highlighted. I'm sketching these out very quickly, and there's a lot more that I could say about this. So, first of all, in the training that I deliver when I'm working with teachers in a bilingual education context, the training focuses on CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. So these are competencies that are related to that methodology. The first one there is this idea of being able to plan effective sequences of learning, or a learning progression, whether that's a sequence of learning across a lesson or across a series of lessons. So teachers need help with planning in a bilingual education context, the sequences of learning, thinking about how to start and end that sequence, but also thinking about the steps or stages in the middle there. And this is where we do have to actually think about underlying or underpinning principles, because teachers might need to think about how the progression, the learning progression from a conceptual dimension, how it might progress from the general to the specific. Or from a linguistic perspective, how it might progress from a word level through to a sentence level to a text level. Or from a cognitive perspective, how it might move from concrete to abstract, or from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. So this is an important aspect of professional development for teachers, the idea of planning a sequence of learning. The next area that I've identified there is the notion of scaffolding or support. And I think it's a feature of an effective or good CLIL lesson that there is lots of support for the learners. And broadly, we can look at support from 2 main perspectives. First of all, in terms of supporting the input that is being given to the students, guiding their understanding of that input. That's what we call receptive scaffolding. But then on the other side, how learners are supported to produce language, whether that's written or spoken language. So that's a second aspect of professional development. Teachers need training in developing and creating and using support techniques and procedures. The third area that I've got there is formative assessment. Now, actually, this is a term that's often used in lots of different ways in education, but by formative assessment, what I mean is the ways in which teachers collect information about the learning that is happening in the lesson, and then use that information to plan the next steps in the lesson, in the learning. And formative assessment has most impact when it's taking place within and between lessons. So as the lesson unfolds, this is what we call short cycle formative assessment. And in a bilingual education context, there needs to be a lot of formative assessment. So teachers need training in formative assessment principles and practice. The fourth area that I've got there is identifying the language of the subject. And what I mean by that is not only topic-specific vocabulary, but also the language of the subject at sentence and text levels. So at a text level, the text types that would be associated with a subject. And at a sentence level, the use of what is also referred to as, for example, functional language, which allows you to think through the language in certain ways. So the language of the subject is more than just a word level vocabulary issue. It's also about sentence level and text level. And finally, what I've put there is I think it's important to support bilingual education teachers to develop a classroom culture of cooperation, critical thinking, and creativity. So they need to know about cooperative learning formats and structures. They need to look at how to develop materials that engage and motivate learners to think critically and to work and create and learn in creative ways. There's a lot there, and I've done a very quick sketch of these 5 competency areas. And as I say, there's a lot more that I could go into here. I want to finish off then by just saying that I think there are some useful existing teaching standards frameworks for CLIL teaching standards frameworks that can be useful for schools in terms of planning professional development. These are frameworks that can be used to help observing lessons, to help teachers set targets for their own professional development. I can put the links in for these frameworks into the chat later on. But I think these frameworks can be a useful resource in terms of professional development. And finally, because I'm coming to the end now, I think it's also worth mentioning the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference. I would also include this as something that bilingual education teachers should know about and be familiar with from the point of view of their own language development, but also in terms of understanding the language development of the learners that they're working with. So that's my short presentation. I think I've stuck to the time limit. I can stop the sharing of my screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. That was so interesting. I was taking a lot of notes here. So okay. I will ask everybody who's participating and listening to take their own notes as well. Ask questions in the chat, and we are going to address those questions in the end. Okay. Thank you so much for now, Jason. And Silvana, the word is yours now.
Thank you very much. I just want to check that everybody can see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, fantastic. Thank you and welcome to this section of the panel. And I've been invited to talk about teacher development in times of remote learning or in times of crisis. And one of the things I wanted to start with, sorry, I should not have done that. Yes, one of the things I wanted to start with is the idea that even in the most normal times, not critical times, sometimes for some schools, it is difficult to prioritize the professional learning and development of teachers. So never mind when times are not critical, when times are critical, like, you know, over the last 8 months with the pandemic, etc. For many schools and for many leaders of heads, etc., managers, it's been really, really difficult to maintain and to sustain teacher learning. And the first thing that, if you like, gets dropped and deprioritized is the professional development of teachers. So the first message I wanted to give here is about the importance of maintaining teacher learning. And that's what I really want to focus on today. But in addition to the more cognitive aspects or skills development aspects of promoting professional learning among teachers, I think it's really, really important at this time and over the time that we don't know how long it'll last, the pandemic and its aftermath, is not just about supporting the cognitive and skills development of teachers, but also remember that teachers have been working pretty much from home in isolation for the last 8 months, and it has been a very critical time of massive changes both in their professional and in their personal lives. So to really support teachers from that point of view of giving them access to a community and try to recreate the personal and professional spaces that we have lost when physical brick and mortar schools had to close, if you were teaching in physical schools, is really, really important. So, as I said, learning together is crucial. And in my organization, I asked some of our teachers and teacher educators to tell me what they thought what was one of the most important aspects of any professional development activities that they did throughout lockdown and the quarantine. And this, I think, is a representative answer to that question from one of our teachers, Anna, who said, the most important thing for me was that I felt like while I was learning with my colleagues online, I was part of a team. We were learning together. We were trying to get through the challenges that we were all facing. But the really important thing is that we were all in it together in some way. So I really want to reinforce this, that if you lead a group of teachers and if you are responsible or accountable for their professional development and organizing professional development activities and events, it's really important to create opportunities for learning together safely, whether that is, as the photo on the left, on socially distant settings or hybrid settings, or online through softwares and video conferencing solutions like Zoom or Teams or whatever. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that teachers have opportunities to learn together. Now, I am a great believer in non-critical times of asynchronous learning. Teachers having access to online learning so that they can learn at their own time, in their own time, at their own pace. However slowly or fast they want to, etc. But I think at this particular time, at this critical time, it's really important to prioritize synchronous teacher learning. By this, I mean all teachers learning at the same time and in the same place. And please take place to be either physical, brick and mortar schools, or online environments. So, in trying to answer this question, what can we do to recreate spaces of meaningful professional encounter, particularly if you work in a physical school and you had to close that in March? And you're not going back anytime soon, or you might be in the next few weeks. But I think it's really important to focus on what matters to teachers. And in my experience, and from when I hear my colleagues, and also I think Jason said this before, it's really important to focus on practice and what matters to teachers. Teachers are practitioners. They're interested in what they're going to be teaching tomorrow and day after tomorrow and next month. So I think it's really important to focus on what is sometimes described as transferable teacher learning. In other words, that kind of teacher learning that teachers can actually apply and implement in a critical way, of course, and in a very aware manner, but that they can transfer to their practice and that it's really relevant and useful for their students. And just a reminder from Pendleton and Fórum to say that inspiration has two kinds of components: an intellectual component and an emotional component. I think this is true at any time, but particularly now, this is really important, that the professional development activities and events that we create and produce and promote for teachers have both of these elements or components. So let's have a quick look at inspiration as an intellectual component and how can we promote that. My first tip, if you like, would be to create opportunities for finding solutions together. Solutions to problems, but also solutions in the sense of strategies, etc. And I'm quoting here Doris Santoro, who says that whenever teachers are brought in together to investigate or to find solutions to problems or questions that they might have, issues, and develop interventions, approaches, techniques, you're creating opportunities for authentic community, which is what is so badly needed right now, and taking action in a way that feels less isolating, which I think it's so important to tackle right now. So a couple of thoughts about the do's and don'ts of continuing professional development during critical times. Number one, please don't drop or deprioritize teacher learning. It's as important as ever, or even more important than ever. Teachers still have to learn a lot. As you in Brazil transition out of lockdown and you start opening schools again, and there's the likelihood of hybrid learning, there's still a lot of relearning to do. Social distancing changes the dynamics of the classroom. So these are things that teachers will continue to learn. And also there's the issue of lost learning, how much learning students might have lost while they were learning from home, and what does the catch-up period look like? So what do we have to focus on? What do we have to prioritize when children and young people go back to the classroom? So some thoughts. This is not the time to, even though the literature says that, or some of the literature around effective continuing professional development says that, professional development that's really effective is prolonged. So one topic over a long term, this is not the time for this. Neither is this the time for being over ambitious or creating time-consuming professional development events or extremely costly. We're having financial problems in the world, and operationally complex either. This is a time for simplicity. This is a time for short and frequent events. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes in every meeting, rather than a long CPD day once a term or whatever your setup could be. Really focused on one topic and practical, and very relevant to the teachers and the realities with the students, what they need to be learning next, etc. So I wanted to share with you 2 strategies that we have tried in our organization at Bell to support the continuing professional development of our teachers during these critical times. One is the 6D cycle, and the other one is show and tell. Let me tell you and talk you very briefly through them. So the 6Ds cycle is a cycle that's adapted from cycles of teacher research. But as I said, we can't really, it's not the time for lengthy cycles of teacher research at this moment. So this is a kind of practical adaptation of it. And the objective of this kind of activity is for teachers to find solutions and test if they work. George Balbino was saying before, let's get teachers to test and evaluate the technology with the teachers. So this is the kind of framework that you can apply to manage that kind of test and learn. So let me tell you what the 6 stages are, and then I'll talk through briefly each one of at each point. So number 1 is discover, number 2 is decide, number 3 is design, number 4 do, number 5 debrief, and number 6 disseminate. More about this in a second. So first is discover. Discover is about teachers thinking together and having conversations about what they could try. So what's out there, what application, what technology, what strategy, what technique is out there that might be useful for us as we are going through the challenges in our school. Now, that's an exploratory stage. What could we do? So stage number 2 is deciding. Out of everything that we said we could be looking at, what are we actually going to try? So make a decision together. Then we move on to the design phase, which is basically very quickly but having a conversation and planning how we're going to implement this test, if you like. So who are we going to do it with which class, for example, when, for how long, how. And then we move on to do, which is the actual apply that strategy and technique, and of course gather information as we go along and evaluate as we go along. Number 5, debrief, would be the sort of final evaluation. So how well did it work? Has it solved the problem that we have, the puzzle that we have, the challenge that we have? Is it worth developing further this that we've tried and sharing with colleagues? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we move on to the 6th and last moment of the cycle or stage of the cycle, which is disseminate. And for that, what we have been using at Bell is the next activity, show and tell. This is a classic. Everybody has done show and tell, but what I want to show you here is a very off the peg, if you like, framework that we've used at Bell that has really structured the show and tell in a very positive and effective way, both for our teachers, but also we've been applying this framework with a group of teacher educators in Chile with the Ministry of Education there, and it's been really successful. It works really well. So this is to share what teachers have learned with other teachers, and the and this is a framework that I was saying was really useful. So start by asking teachers to say, I've tried, and say which technique or which activity, which technology, etc., with my, and they describe the class, because, and they explain the reason for their choice. This is how it works, and then the teachers describe and show the procedure. It worked, and they say why it worked, or why it worked really well, or what was it about it that worked well. And then they recommend it and say, I recommend it because, and they say why. And perhaps you might want to, and there they make suggestions for, you know, different classes, variations, ideas, learning, things that they've learned along the way. This can be done, say, for example, you have a staff meeting with teachers every week. One teacher at a time could do this. And it takes as little as between 7 and 15 minutes with this structure. The alternative is, if you can't meet face to face, is to either do it on Zoom or Teams, or get the teachers to actually record videos as well for the show and tell, and then talk about those. Show and tell, basically, it's about awareness. So helping teachers become aware of techniques, strategies, etc., that they may not be aware of, and to inspire them to try them out themselves. So the difference, if you like, between show and tell and the 60 cycle is that show and tell stays at, okay, here is what I've done, have a look, take it or leave it. So my colleague, may want to decide to take it forward, or you may decide, well, that might not work for me. So it stays there. Whereas the 60 cycle offers teachers support throughout the cycle of implementing it. So from the initial exploration and decision making to evaluating. So it provides a framework for test and learn. That's the difference. I think it's really important as well to move into giving teachers more choice right now. I feel that back in March and at the start of of lockdown and all that, at least in my organization, we were focused on getting everybody to learn whatever they needed to learn in the week before we had to close the school. You know, it was just mad. And it was a little bit of CPD, command and control. We couldn't give teachers much choice about what they wanted to learn, how they wanted to learn it, when they wanted to learn it. We just all had a week to get a handle on remote teaching and learning. Now, teachers have been developing their skills for about 8 months, and we are moving into the transition towards getting back into physical, socially distanced classrooms, hybrid teaching, etc. So it's really important to open up those opportunities for teachers to focus on things that matter to them individually and to their classes. And these two frameworks offer that possibility for differentiation. I said inspiration has an intellectual component, but also an emotional component. And this is where I want to really close, the importance of professional connection, first within school. And this is another colleague who couldn't take part for a little time, well, when the school closed, in professional development, and then he came back again online. And this is what he says: it was nice to be in a professional learning environment again, and to see some familiar faces. So let's not underestimate the importance of teachers getting together and having that relationship together again. And he said, it was a positive experience, and I came away feeling better about work, the organization, and my place in it. So what I'm trying to say here is that creating those spaces of sharing and learning together actually is good for teachers' well-being as well, and for their sanity. And finally, another colleague who attended a webinar and said, how surprising that a webinar could help with a low mood. Our organization connected me with my community, and I felt at home in that space. So we're talking about belonging, and we're talking about an emotional impact, a well-being impact around organizing good professional development for our teachers. So very quickly, just to say that I work for Bell, and that at Bell we do organize professional development events to help. And this is a list of new 5-hour online modules. And I invite you, I won't talk about them, but I will invite you, if you're interested, to look for more information in our website, which I will also post the link after the presentation. Also to tell you that our sister organization, the Bell Foundation, which is a charitable trust, produces free resources and materials for teachers in international schools and bilingual schools. So have a look at Great Ideas videos that we have produced, which look at aspects of practice when we work through the medium of English, and also downloadable resources for teaching in English that you can use in your CLIL lessons or in your EAL lessons or in your subject lessons. So thank you very much. And I will now stop sharing. And Selma, over to you.
Thank you, Silvana. That was really inspiring and raised lots of questions in the Q&A here. So I will start with the last question because that was aimed at what you just said now. So André felt that what you're presenting seems related to the micro teaching and dropping observations. And he feels that it's hard for teachers to see the value of this kind of professional development. They expect something bigger, theoretical, like harder, not based on their own experience. Would you suggest any way to change their minds and see the value of reflection about their own work?
Yes, I wouldn't say that this is related to micro teaching at all. This is about teachers getting together. The idea is think of a teachers meeting. Yeah, think of a teachers meeting and think of after the administration or whatever you need to do in the teachers meeting, you spend a very short period of 10, 15 minutes every meeting is building the consistency and the frequency and saying, have a look. This is about learning from and with each other. I was educated. I'm a next door neighbor in Argentina, even though I've lived in the UK for over 20 years. So I totally see and understand where you're coming from, and this value of, I was trained in a tradition whereby you had to spend 4 years at university before you were allowed to do some teaching practice. I mean, and I learned lots and lots and lots of theory. I think we know that, and we know we can do that. And of course, I can give you 10,000 references and we can talk until we're blue in the face, but we're in a critical moment where what matters is that tomorrow, that teacher who doesn't know how to work with a socially distanced class can feel that they can stand up and deliver with confidence. So this is why I'm saying, I'm not saying let's this theory. Of course not. Every practice should be underpinned, and I'm the first believer in evidence-informed practice. What I'm saying is, even the cycle that I've shown is based on a cycle of teacher research, which the CPD literature says that it is impactful professional development, that there should be, that effective and impactful professional development links theory with practice. But it's not just the theory that the academic in the, there writes for other academics and for policymakers. And then I kind of go, yes, this is the truth, and I will apply it now. This is about, yes, applying the theory and the insights from the evidence, but also theorizing about my own practice and learning from my own practice. And this is what this aims to do, and that's why we're saying, okay, we apply, but we don't just apply and then take the bus and go home. We apply and we evaluate and we share and we think about what worked well and how we could implement it in our own. So it's about that integration of theory with practice. The exploratory stage, for example, in the 60th cycle would look at the theory. But one of the things, at least in the UK, the context where I'm now, is that there are lots of research reports and things like that try to give us the short version, because we've got to apply tomorrow, and we can't spend weeks and months reading about what works when this is a crisis and it's very changeable from time to time, and things when you look at how things are changing, they're changing pretty much week by week, so that requires a very dynamic response. That's my opinion, at least.
Thank you very much. And then the next question, I'm going to group two questions that were very similar, one from André and another one from Rodolfo. So they're talking about bilingual education being in kind of the early stages in Brazil. and how hard it is to find professionals that have the competences that you both mentioned. So whether linguistic competences or teaching competences. So do you have any suggestions for a country that is going through this major change and finally developing towards bilingual education for more students? How do you get the teachers to get these competences as quickly and effectively as possible?
Shall I answer that first, Silvana?
Yeah.
Try to answer it. I don't think there's any shortcuts. So I think you've got to be realistic. If you're serious about supporting teachers, I mean, Silvana's just been talking about an approach to teacher development that involves giving teachers time to do that sort of activity. So that's another important issue here. Schools need to recognise, I mentioned this a little bit in my presentation, that planning and preparation for a CLIL lesson is longer than it would be for a teacher, you know, planning and preparing a normal lesson. There's implications there, therefore, in terms of the amount of time teachers are given in their week task allocation. So there's no short route to it, but it's something that needs to be planned and thought through. It's not going to happen overnight. And when you get situations, and there are examples in parts of the world where basically the idea has been that overnight we can invent a whole new education system and teachers are just expected to get on with it, and it doesn't work. Fun, you know, no surprise there. It doesn't work because teachers can't just overnight change their practice. They need support, they need the professional development support. So it has to be planned so that it takes time, and it needs to be realistic.
I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Yeah. So in that same question, they also mentioned what's the role of initial development, like undergrad studies and continued development for teachers, and what's the role of academics and the school? Is there a balance? Is it more in the hands of the school to develop their own staff? How do you suggest we address this?
Do you want me to go first, Jason, with that one?
Okay.
Okay, so it's a big question. So I can tell you a little bit about what's been happening in the UK that may or may not help. But I think one of the realizations in the state sector in the UK was that there was a disconnect between initial teacher education, so what teachers learned in their initial preparation, that tended to happen either in universities or in university-led teaching kind of teaching schools, etc. And then once the teachers became qualified, the kind of professional development that they were engaging in schools. So one of the things that the government did to try and address that was, first of all, they basically looked at the evidence about what are the competencies that teachers need to develop, etc., etc. And then they developed two things, two framework documents, national, which are very similar. One is the core content framework for initial teacher training, and the other one is called the early career framework that supports teachers who are early career, new to teaching. And it's not just a document. These teachers were given support and release and time within their teaching. So say if they work 30 hours in the school, they have in the first year, they have 20% of that time allocated to learning together, planning together, the kinds of things that Jason was mentioning. And then in the second year of their teaching, 10% of their allocation for that. So the standards and the competencies are the same. But what you do with them deepen as so for example, if when in initial teacher education, it would be things like develop an awareness of X, Y, and Z. In the early career framework, it would be evaluate critically, but the standards remain the same so that there is a coherence when you leave initial teacher education and become an early career teacher. So that's the link. Trying to make sure that they're better linked, that there is a conversation and there is some kind of coherence and cohesion, if you like, between initial teacher education and continuing professional development. In terms of academics and practitioners, I think it's the most useless divide I've ever seen in my life. I'm sorry to me. But I think there's a role. Jason was mentioning the Common European Framework. The new companion volume talks about mediation. And I think there is a lot of mediation that needs to be done between the research that's written for academics, by academics, or by academics for policymakers, and how teachers can access that research and transfer that judiciously as it's appropriate to the context and their practice. Teachers don't have time. I know how busy Brazilian teachers are. You can't spend, 3 a.m. on a Sunday reading a 90-page research report about one interview. You can't do that. So there needs to be, good luck if you, I wish you could. And you can if you want to, but there needs to be mediation. There needs to be, and this is I think the fundamental role of teacher educators and teacher education organizations in helping translate, mediate that academic research for practitioners. So just, doing an exercise of what is really relevant to practice, and then the teacher educators looking at how can, these practitioners actually apply this meaningfully in to whatever is relevant to their context, into their practice. Sorry to be so long-winded, Jason.
Well, the only thing to add to that I would say is that we do see in some European contexts where at an initial teacher training level, in these programs, there is a component that includes training for bilingual education context. So, for example, I used to work in the Netherlands. The program that I worked on there was a whole sort of module all about international and bilingual teaching, and with a focus on the teaching practice, because it was an initial teacher training program. So that might be something that needs to happen at some point in Brazil, that at an initial teacher training level, programs include a component which is specifically focusing on CLIL, for example. At the point at which teachers are then in schools, I would just sort of echo what Silvana's been talking about in terms of the importance of giving ownership to teachers over the professional development that takes place. And I think the example of a sort of classroom investigation approach, action research, practitioner inquiry, lesson study, there's lots of things that names that we could give this, the 6 Ds that Silvana was talking about. This is one way to do that, to give teachers ownership over their professional development. It doesn't work, and I've worked myself as a teacher in institutions where the professional development, typically it's a CPD day and the agenda is set by the management. In my view, that has little, or the impact is less in comparison to when you actually involve teachers in setting the professional development agenda and giving them ownership.
Thank you. Our time is short, so I will bring just 2 questions, sadly. And then anybody who's interested in learning more, please get in touch with the organization of the event. And then you will have other opportunities to continue discussing all those interesting topics. So the first question that I will ask both of you is about public education in Brazil. It's underfunded, it's not valued enough in society. Teachers have very poor resources, and now a lot of schools are going bilingual, which is great. And lots of teachers are looking for development, learning resources. Have you got an experience, any tips for those teachers?
Who are looking for resources, Selma?
Resources and learning. Where can public school teachers learn more about this and bring this knowledge to their schools in Brazil? Like learning and resources.
Well, in terms of CLIL, there's lots of literature. which is written for teachers, that are very, and that's very practical, that will give teachers lots of resources that they can use straight away in their teaching. I mean, I'll just off the top of my head mention 3 books. The first is CLIL Essentials by Peter Mehisto, recent publication. The second is called Putting CLIL into Practice by Phil Ball, John Clegg and Keith Kelly. That's a little bit older, 2015, still very good. And then a slightly older book called CLIL Activities by Liz Dale and Rosie Tanner. All those 3 books have lots of ideas for teaching practice. So there's resources. There are also some good websites that people can go to. So there's the One Stop English website with the One Stop CLIL bit. You do have to subscribe, unfortunately, but you know, if you can persuade your school to subscribe, then there's some good resources there. One last thing that I would say is that although I work for Nile, I do have another hat, which is working for Cambridge International Assessment and Education, and they have lots of resources as well that are worth checking out, that are free. So if you Google getting started with resources, there's lots of things that could be helpful for teachers there as well. It's probably a bit naughty of me to mention Cambridge when I'm here for Nile, but anyway, whatever. There is a lot that you can find online, I would say.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I hope the teachers are listening and taking notes, because you clearly should start there.
Can I just, I'll just add very, very briefly. I mean, Jason did a long and very useful list. I just wanted to add again what I mentioned. Please check the Bell Foundation resources. It used to be called EAL Nexus, but there's a wealth of resources for all levels, different all ages and stages, so primary, secondary, different subjects, etc. And they have a focus on language and the subject. So they basically promote language development in the curriculum. The other useful resource that I want to recommend as well, that in the Bell Foundation website, is the EAL assessment framework for schools. And basically it's allowing schools to assess the language proficiency of their students, but within the curriculum. So it's not an English test that has nothing to do, an EFL general English test, but it's an assessment framework that allows you to evaluate the proficiency in English of your pupils within the curriculum, and it allows you to set targets, and it also brings support strategies to develop the language proficiency of the children. And also there's a tracker tool that allows you to record the proficiency progress, generate reports, etc. So please check it. All free.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your general sharing. And then the last question is my question, because I was dying to ask, so I will be a little bit selfish. I see that we are going through a mental shift related to monolingualism, from monolingualism to plurilingualism or bilingualism in the country, and it's not unique to Brazil. So in your experience, how do you aid the society and the teachers and parents and everybody to rethink their values and beliefs? Because usually they thought learning a second language could jeopardize the learning of the first, and all that that comes from monolingual ideologies. Do you have any suggestions about the society as a whole?
With difficulty, I would say, with lots of difficulty. It's very difficult to change people's beliefs. I mean, there's research that it's one of the most difficult things to eradicate people's beliefs. Even in the face of evidence, people will continue to believe. But I think it's an education piece. It's about engaging with the parents. The parents put a lot of pressure, and sometimes they want their children to go to bilingual schools, and this idea that languages are two separate, two isolated realities, and that they shouldn't mix. So your Portuguese should not interfere with your English and vice versa. But I think it's about educating all the staff, so that there is also a language policy or languages policy that we all live, not just a document, and that we all agree that this is how we're going to be doing things around here, So with that, and educating them around the values of bilingualism, developing a multilingual identity, etc. language policy, lived language policy, celebrating multilingualism, celebrating the value of whatever languages the student speak as a vehicle and a useful learning tool to learn and acquire other languages, and then educating the parents. But I think there's also a methodological piece around the methodology of translanguaging, for example, and there's an important professional development work to do around that.
Yeah, all I would add is that we need to emphasize the benefits. And, you know, research on bilingualism shows that the bilingual brain is able to solve problems better and is more flexible and open-minded. So this is a clear benefit of becoming bilingual. And I think as well, when we look at CLIL, it's an opportunity to develop really creative and innovative teaching practices. I was talking about cooperative learning, and I think we need, you talk about a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift that has to take place in education is to move away from this individualistic, competitive-based paradigm to this cooperative paradigm. And that's also a benefit, because then everyone is able to succeed in the learning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Silvana and Jason, for sharing all those amazing ideas. I'm sure everybody would like to spend many more hours with you, learning and exchanging and asking questions, but sadly your time is up. And then I end by thanking you for everything you shared. And thank you, Barbara and Larissa and all the UK team education for making this possible. So Barbara, could you please give some last words? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Selma, for such a brilliant moderation. And thank you, Silvana and Jason, for an amazing presentation. I see that colleagues here in the chat, they really value the suggestions, tips, and information you gave. And I'm sure there will be other opportunities for us to keep this exchange happening. So thank you very much for being with us. Muito obrigada a todos que permaneceram conosco até agora. Foi uma discussão muito rica e muitos pontos para a gente continuar refletindo e pensando juntos. Eu vi algumas perguntas aqui sobre o nome dos livros que o Jason mencionou, ele mandou aqui, mas a gente vai mandar novamente depois. Mas muita coisa para a gente pensar. Foi mencionado sobre language policies, formação continuada, o ciclo dos 6Ds que a Silvana mencionou. Eu achei uma dica maravilhosa para a gente pensar e ter uma estrutura na cabeça, né? O que a gente tem que olhar. As dicas do Jason sobre o CFR para CLIL também foi super interessante. Agradeço de novo vocês e lembro que temos um último painel hoje às 2 horas. Vocês devem ter recebido o link de acesso. Nós voltaremos às 2, faremos essa pausa agora. Lembro que os vídeos e a gravação desse evento estará disponível posteriormente no nosso canal do UK em Brasil. A gente vai mandar algumas comunicações para vocês por e-mail também, para aqueles que se cadastraram, para que vocês possam acompanhar essas discussões. Por favor, fiquem super à vontade de entrar em contato comigo, com a nossa equipe, através do e-mail que foi colocado aí no chat, que é o education.brasil@fcdo.gov.uk. A gente vai continuar trabalhando essa agenda. Nossa equipe trabalha não só com educação básica, educação bilíngue, ensino de inglês, mas diversas outras frentes. Se vocês tiverem interesse, podemos compartilhar posteriormente também. E convido vocês a se juntarem a nós às 14 horas. Agradeço a todos os palestrantes e a todos que ficaram conosco até agora. E até logo. Obrigada. Tchau, tchau.